The psychology trick that rewires you for discipline. Carl Jung, there's a moment in life when you realize discipline isn't actually about willpower, motivation, or grinding harder than everyone else. It's about something far more ancient, far more psychological, and far more personal to the hidden mechanisms of your own mind. Carl Jung believed that discipline isn't built by force, it's built by alignment. When your conscious mind and your unconscious desires are in conflict, you lose the battle every time. That's why so many people set goals, make plans, promise themselves change, and fail. Not because they are weak, lazy, or incapable, but because a deeper part of their psyche has not agreed to the transformation. And the unconscious mind always wins. So the real question is, how do we get the unconscious to work with us instead of against us? That is the psychology trick that rewires you for discipline. Discipline fails when the goal you set belongs to the ego but not to the soul. When you say, "I want to wake up early," but your inner world still associates mornings with dread, obligation, pressure, or memories of past failures. When you say, "I want to succeed," but your subconscious fears the judgment, responsibility, or exposure success might bring. When you say, "I want to get in shape," but a younger part of you still uses food as comfort or a shield. Jung believed that the unconscious holds the real script of your life, the emotional blueprint that determines your behavior. And unless that blueprint changes, discipline can never be more than a temporary performance, something you do for a while until your deeper impulses pull you back into old patterns.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let me ask you something that may reveal more than you expect. When you fail at discipline, does it feel like you lost control, or does it feel like some unseen part of you took over? That unseen part is the unconscious, and it's not your enemy. It's simply repeating what it has been taught through emotion, repetition, and identity. To build discipline, you don't overpower this inner force, you rewire it. You teach it a new story. You give it a new identity. You convince it, on a symbolic level, that the version of you you're trying to become is not a threat to the self, but an evolution of the self. Jung believed that transformation happens when a new archetype emerges, when your mind adopts a new pattern of being that feels natural rather than forced. For discipline, that archetype is the inner warrior, the inner creator, the inner sovereign. The part of you that acts not because it must, but because it is aligned with who you are becoming. This is why most people fail. They try to change through resistance instead of integration. They try to discipline themselves from the outside in. They punish, criticize, shame, and force themselves. But the psyche doesn't respond to force. It responds to meaning. If you want real discipline, you don't start with rules, you start with identity. You start with asking, who am I becoming? And why must this change happen now? Because once the unconscious accepts a new identity, discipline stops feeling like discipline. It becomes instinct. Jung often said that the greatest burden we carry is the unlived life inside us. And here lies the secret. Discipline becomes effortless when it is tied to the life you know you are meant to live. When your actions match your inner vision, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop fighting cravings, procrastination, comfort, or distraction. You stop betraying your future self for the sake of temporary relief. You don't need motivation because you feel pulled by the person you are becoming. This is what Jung called the teleological force, the forward pull of our potential. Most people try to change their behavior while ignoring this force entirely. But once you awaken it, everything changes. Think about a time in your life when discipline came naturally. Maybe you were passionate about something. Maybe you were desperate. Maybe you were inspired. Maybe you were pushed by a vision of something bigger than your excuses. In those moments, you didn't struggle. You didn't need to be convinced. You didn't procrastinate. You didn't collapse under your impulses. You were aligned. This shows that discipline is not something you lack, it's something you access. It appears when your inner world and outer actions match. So the real question becomes, what blocks that alignment? Jung believed that the greatest obstacle to discipline is the shadow, the part of you that contains repressed fears, wounds, temptations, desires, and beliefs you've never faced. Every time you try to change, the shadow pushes back. Not because it wants to sabotage you, but because it's trying to protect you from what it perceives as danger. The shadow fears loss of comfort, loss of identity, loss of familiar patterns. And loss of familiar patterns. That's why self-sabotage feels automatic. You're not fighting laziness, you're fighting fear. and fear lies deeper than discipline can reach. So the psychology trick that rewires you for discipline is this: you must integrate the shadow so your unconscious stops fighting your goals. Because once the unconscious joins the mission, your resistance disappears. Let me ask you something final before we go deeper. If your unconscious mind fully supported your goals instead of opposing them, how unstoppable would you become? In the next part, we explore the exact psychological mechanism Jung believed could transform your inner conflict into unstoppable discipline. How integrating the shadow makes discipline automatic. Most people believe discipline is about defeating their impulses, suppressing their desires, or overpowering their weakness. But Jung saw it differently. He believed what we call weakness is not the enemy, it's the shadow. And the shadow cannot be crushed. It cannot be silenced. It cannot be bullied into obedience. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. This is why the harder you try to force discipline, the more resistance you feel. Jung said, "What you resist persists." And this is never more true than when you try to change yourself. If your shadow sees discipline as a threat, it will sabotage you every time, quietly, subtly, instinctively. You'll procrastinate without knowing why. You'll give in to cravings before you even think. You'll lose focus at the exact moment you need it most. You will feel taken over, because in a very real sense, you are. The shadow has taken the wheel. Integrating the shadow means making a radical shift. Instead of treating your unconscious impulses like the enemy, you turn toward them with curiosity. You ask, what is this urge protecting me from? What is this avoidance trying to save me from feeling? What belief or wound is being activated right now? When you ask these questions, something incredible happens. The shadow stops being a monster in the dark and becomes a messenger. It reveals fears you didn't know you had, emotional patterns you never understood, stories you've been carrying since childhood, and hidden beliefs that have silently shaped your identity. These revelations are uncomfortable, but they are liberating. Let me ask you something that will reveal a truth you've never considered. When you fail at discipline, are you experiencing a lack of will, or are you experiencing a wound that has never been acknowledged? This is the psychological heart of discipline. You don't struggle because you're undisciplined, you struggle because the part of you carrying the wound is terrified of change. And until that part feels seen, heard, and integrated, it will resist every effort you make. Jung believed that when you bring the shadow into consciousness, when you stop judging it and start understanding it, you remove its power to sabotage you. Suddenly, the procrastination loses its grip because you understand what fear is hiding beneath it. The cravings lose their pull because you recognize the emotion you were trying to escape. The distractions stop controlling you because you see the insecurity driving them. When the shadow is understood, it becomes integrated. It stops resisting. When it stops resisting, discipline becomes natural. Imagine trying to build discipline while part of you is terrified that success will make you visible, judged, or unworthy. That part will sabotage you to protect you. Now imagine integrating that fear, understanding it, calming it, giving it a new role in your psychological structure. Suddenly, instead of fighting your progress, that part begins supporting it. That is the secret of shadow integration. The enemy becomes the ally. Jung believed that the unconscious contains immense energy that is usually trapped in fear, repression, shame, or avoidance. When the shadow is integrated, that trapped energy is released. And discipline is nothing more than applied energy. When you release the energy locked in your shadow, discipline stops being a struggle. You begin to wake up earlier not because you force yourself, but because your inner world no longer resists mornings. You work consistently not because you feel guilty when you don't, but because your unconscious finally supports the work. You resist distractions naturally because you no longer need escapism. You follow through on your plans because you are no longer divided internally. Integration creates inner alignment, and inner alignment creates discipline. Most people never achieve discipline because they treat their impulses like enemies. But every impulse is a doorway to deeper understanding. Procrastination is often fear of failure or fear of judgment. Overeating might be fear of emptiness or a longing for comfort. Distraction might be fear of confronting your true potential. Laziness might be exhaustion from constantly trying to be someone you're not. The shadow is not sabotaging you because it hates your goals, it's sabotaging you because it's trying to protect your emotional survival. So ask yourself, what part of me is scared to become the disciplined version of myself? What comfort, identity, or coping mechanism will I lose if I succeed? The moment you identify that fear, something shifts. The shadow becomes conscious. And once it's conscious, you're no longer controlled by it. This is why Jung believed that true discipline is emotional, not behavioral. Behavior follows alignment. Alignment follows integration. Integration follows awareness. And awareness begins with the courage to look inward instead of running outward. In the next part, we go deeper into the psychological mechanism that turns discipline from a forced behavior into a natural identity, and why identity, not motivation, is the real engine of long-term transformation. How changing your identity makes discipline effortless. There is a moment in every deep psychological transformation when discipline stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a natural expression of who you are. That moment is rooted not in a new habit, not in a new routine, not in a new planner or system. It is rooted in a new identity. Jung believed that identity is the strongest force in the human psyche, not desire, not willpower, not motivation, identity. Because the unconscious mind has one primary mission: maintain the consistency of who you believe yourself to be. If you see yourself as inconsistent, you will act inconsistently. If you see yourself as lazy, you will behave lazily. If you see yourself as someone who always quits, you will unconsciously sabotage progress to preserve that identity. The unconscious would rather keep you miserable than allow your identity to be threatened. This is why discipline feels impossible for some people. They are trying to build disciplined behavior on top of an undisciplined identity. Let me ask you something that will cut to the heart of your internal struggle. Do you act inconsistently because you lack discipline, or because your current identity has no place for the disciplined version of you? When your identity is misaligned with your aspirations, your unconscious will always choose the identity. Always. This is why people can go to the gym for 3 weeks and then fall off. Why they start a project passionately and abandon it halfway. Why they commit to waking early but hit the snooze button again and again. Their actions changed temporarily, but their identity did not. Jung believed that transformation only becomes permanent when a new archetype emerges, when you stop trying to act differently and instead start seeing yourself differently. The real psychological trick to discipline is not forcing consistent action. It is becoming the kind of person for whom consistent action feels natural. This is the difference between acting and being. Acting requires effort. Being requires alignment. When you shift your identity from someone trying to be disciplined to someone who is disciplined, your entire psychological structure reorganizes itself around that belief. Your choices change. Your impulses change. Your tolerance for distraction decreases. Your relationship with discomfort evolves. Discipline becomes an extension of your identity rather than an interruption to it. This is why people who truly embody discipline rarely talk about motivation. They don't need it. Discipline is simply how they behave because it's who they are. This is the power Jung was pointing toward. The moment your unconscious accepts a new identity, it stops resisting and starts supporting you. Suddenly, you don't need to force yourself to work you want to work. You don't need to push yourself to focus. Your mind naturally avoids distraction. You don't need to remind yourself of your goals. They become the gravitational center of your decisions. But here's the profound psychological truth. Your current identity wasn't built consciously. It was built through emotional experiences, patterns you absorbed, labels people gave you, childhood survival strategies, and repeated behaviors. Discipline becomes effortless only when you consciously rebuild your identity from the inside out. This means asking yourself powerful questions. Who do I want to be? Who must I become to live the life I desire? What identity aligns with my purpose, my potential, my future? Jung believed that you must become the architect of your own psyche. That means deliberately constructing an identity rather than inheriting one. And once that identity feels real, truly real, your unconscious will protect it fiercely. The same force that once sabotaged you will now defend your discipline. It will reject behaviors that don't fit your identity. It will create discomfort when you act out of character. It will pull you back toward alignment. Think of someone who identifies as an athlete. They don't question whether they'll work out, they go because that's what athletes do. Think of someone who identifies as a writer. They don't ask if they should write, they write, because that's who they are. Think of someone who identifies as reliable. They don't fight themselves to show up, they show up, because that identity commands consistency. So the question you must confront is this: what identity are you unknowingly protecting that makes discipline feel impossible? Are you protecting the identity of the overwhelmed person, the anxious person, the I always fail person, the
ready yet person?
the comfort-seeking person? You're unconsciously choose a new one. And here is the beautiful, liberating truth. The moment you commit to a new identity, truly commit, your unconscious rewires itself automatically. The shadow aligns with the new self. The emotions begin supporting your goals. Discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like self-expression. In the final part, we explore the transformation that happens once identity, shadow, and intention merge into a single force, and why that union creates a version of you capable of extraordinary discipline. When your inner world unifies, discipline becomes power. There is a point in your evolution when discipline stops being something you try to do and becomes the natural force that moves your life forward. This shift does not happen because you found the perfect routine or mastered productivity hacks or learned how to silence your emotions. It happens because your inner world, your shadow, your identity, your unconscious impulses, your conscious intentions finally stop fighting each other and begin working as one unified psychological system. Jung believed that a person becomes powerful not when they control their inner world, but when they integrate it, when nothing inside you pulls in the opposite direction, when there is no hidden resistance, no secret self-sabotage, no disowned emotion quietly dragging you backwards. When your inner conflict dissolves, what remains is pure psychological momentum. That momentum is what people call discipline. Imagine a life where your impulses no longer sabotage you because they are aligned with your goals. Imagine a life where your emotional patterns no longer derail your progress because they have been understood and integrated. Imagine a life where your identity naturally pulls you toward action without effort, without guilt, without force. This is what happens when your inner world unifies. Discipline becomes less like rowing against the current and more like being carried by a river that flows in the direction you want to go. Let me ask you something that goes straight to the core of your transformation. If every part of you, your past, your present, your fears, your hopes, your habits, your identity agreed on the path you're walking, how unstoppable would you become? Most people never experience this kind of alignment. They live divided within themselves. One part wants growth, another part fears it. One part wants discipline, another part craves comfort. One part wants success, another part fears judgment. One part wants change, another part clings to the familiar. This internal division drains energy, fractures willpower, and makes discipline feel like a war. Jung would say they are living in a state of psychological fragmentation, many selves, none united, each pulling in different directions. But when integration happens, the war ends. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop bargaining with your goals. You stop oscillating between ambition and avoidance. When the unconscious stops fearing the disciplined version of you, it begins fueling that version of you. Suddenly, the same force that once sabotaged your efforts now becomes the foundation of your consistency. Your internal energy, once scattered, becomes focused. Jung compared this to a lens coming into alignment. When scattered light becomes a beam, it gains intensity. When scattered psyche becomes unified, it gains power. This is why the most disciplined people rarely look stressed. They look calm, grounded, centered. Their discipline is not frantic effort, it is quiet inevitability. Their habits are not desperate, they are deliberate. Their consistency is not rigid, it is natural. And this is not because they are better than you. It's because their inner world is not working against them. Your mind's energy, when unified, becomes a force that can reshape your entire life. You begin waking up early not because you should, but because your identity demands it. You begin working consistently not because you fear failure, but because your unconscious is invested in your success. You resist temptation not because you force yourself, but because it feels out of character. You stay focused not because you suppress distraction, but because your psyche has no interest in escaping. You keep promises to yourself not out of guilt, but out of alignment. This level of discipline is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not exhausting. It is steady. It is clean. It is precise. When your inner world unifies, discipline becomes an expression of your nature, not an act of rebellion against your nature. Jung believed the highest form of human power is self-mastery, not domination, not control, but harmony. When you reach this point of harmony, discipline feels like breathing. It becomes the language through which your potential expresses itself. Your actions stop chasing your goals, they begin embodying them. So let me leave you with a final question, one that will shape the rest of your life if you answer it honestly. If nothing inside you fought against your goals ever again, what is the highest version of yourself you know you could become? Because that version of you is not fantasy. It is the natural result of inner alignment. It is what happens when discipline is no longer effort, but identity, integration, and power working together as one.